Hey, and welcome to this pre-conference, Innovation, Collaboration and New Technology, which is tied to the Global Conference of Investigative Journalism. We are here at Lindholmen Science Park, which is a leading innovation hub in Sweden, with a lot of innovation programs and development going on in different sectors. My name is Jenny Wik, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Gothenburg. I work at the Department of Journalism, Media and Communication. And for some years, I have been affiliated to an innovation platform here, which is called Media and Democracy, where the media industry pool resources to do different development programs. And Media and Democracy is one of the hosts of this pre-conference, and Västra Götaland region is another, and there's been different people helping out. Also, we have volunteers from the MIJ program, which is a Master in Investigative Journalism at the University of Gothenburg, where I used to teach before I came here. For some years now, I have been doing research here at Lindholmen on journalism and AI. And when I started, AI was a very peripheral phenomena, where most journalists said that it's for the innovation department, I don't care. And I've been doing a lot of, interviews and try to get a grasp on what is AI and new technology in the context of journalism. How can it be used as a method? How will it implement the editorial organizing, etc.? And all of a sudden, like last winter, the generative AI exploded, and it was suddenly on everybody's lips. And that is the reason why we choose to start this conference with a discussion on AI. I think we all understand the huge impact it will have on society as well as journalism, all levels of the news process. But we also have other tracks, as you have seen, so you're free to choose and walk from each room to another. And I hope you will feel very welcome and take part and be interactive and discuss in the sessions. So the first session, which I'm going to introduce now, will be Marina Walker Guevara, which we're really proud to welcome as, well, we couldn't say keynote, we weren't allowed, but hey, sort of. Marina is executive editor at the Pulitzer Center, where she has started the AI Accountability Network, which brings together journalists reporting on AI and with AI in public interest. And before joining the center, Marina was the deputy director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and she managed two of the largest collaborations of reporters in journalism history, Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, which involved hundreds of journalists using technology to unravel stories of public interests from terabytes of leaked financial data. Marina was also instrumental in developing the model of large-scale media collaboration, persuading reporters who used to compete with another to collaborate instead, sharing resources and amplify their reach and impact. And this is also the whole connection to our topic for the conference. And collaboration, innovation, and new technology is divided in 3 tracks, but we will also have a closing panel where we tie these threads together in the end. Of course, these trends are entwined. This session will be a lecture of Marina, and then we will have a Q&A for like 10 minutes or so. So feel free to ask questions in the end. Welcome, Marina.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jenny. Hey. Okay, so I was telling Jenny that I thought this was going to be a classroom of like 50 people. And it was going to be fine and intimate. And instead, there's this giant room and so many lovely unknown faces. I want to say how happy I am that we are all back together. Can we give a big applause to everyone and to the conference? And thank you so much to Dave Kaplan, to the fantastic GIJN team, to the Fojo Media Institute, and to the Swedish Association of Investigative Journalists for making it possible. We miss this conference so much. And how fitting, how perfect of a setting this is that we're here in a science park to have this day of pre-conference reflection on some of the big questions facing our profession. As some of you know, collaboration has been a cornerstone, has been something that has anchored my career in journalism, and it has allowed me to do things that I never thought were possible, many of them with several of you. So speaking of impossible ventures, I would like to start with an anecdote from another discipline, which is also fitting for AI because we're always going to be having to work with other disciplines if we're going to tackle the AI challenge. And this anecdote has resonated deeply with me as I reflect about the challenges and promises that journalism faces in times of AI chatbots. On April 10, 2019, astronomers at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics declared at a press conference, "We have seen what until now we thought was unseeable." They were referring to the first ever photograph of a black hole, something that until that point had been considered impossible because to accomplish that, scientists would have needed a telescope the size of the Earth. So instead, 200 not journalists, scientists. The journalists came before the scientists. So 200 scientists joined forces and created a network of synchronized radio telescopes that were set to focus on the same object at the same time and act as a giant virtual telescope. The more telescopes involved, the sharper the image. As the New York Times put it at the time, the scientists had to adjust the telescopes to work together. They had to get the timing right. They had to hope and pray that the weather would cooperate in all locations at the same time. And of course, they had to hope that nothing broke at the same time. It sounded crazy, but for some reason it worked. So now let's think about journalism and how that kind of cooperation and ingenuity grounded in trust and a little bit of crazy has allowed us to overcome our limitations, break new ground, and tackle stories that we thought would be impossible to do. As we sit here today in beautiful Gothenburg, some of you may be feeling that the whole AI in journalism challenge is kind of our own black hole, or better said, black box kind of moment. AI is a complex, fast-evolving, and powerful technology that is set to change our lives. It has already changed it for the better or for the worse. And it can impact millions of people. I like this image because in its simplicity, it summarizes a lot of the concerns that AI generates. The author of this image explains that what we are seeing is a computer scientist. And the algorithm that she has created has jumped out of her computer. And this computer scientist worries about what harm that algorithm might do on the hospitals, schools, and police departments that are currently using it. Maybe you have your own set of concerns regarding AI, and some of them can be very personal. Maybe you feel that there's a lot that you don't know yet about AI. Maybe you feel like you don't have a technical enough background to investigate AI and much less to use AI in your investigations. Or maybe, like me, you are kind of like put off by all the doom and the hype that surrounds AI every time we turn on the TV, we read the newspaper. So I bring a message of encouragement, sort of. We are all in the same boat. This is complex and messy work, and it's also exciting work. Moreover, it is unavoidable. We cannot dodge the AI wave, nor do we need to dodge it or want to do that. Instead, to ease the anxiety, let's use some lessons from the past to see how we can tackle this challenge of the present. Once upon a time, we, investigative reporters, were lone wolves, and we didn't collaborate with anybody, right? Then the internet, organized crime, and fast-evolving technology caught up with us, and we realized we needed a change, and that change should be pretty radical. We needed to change the way we worked. Enter the networks, the collaborations, and today we lived in a complete different paradigm of journalism. We have changed through and through. There are some serious holdouts, but for the most part, we are accepting that collaboration is the new normal. We are, for the most part, not questioning it. And the reason why we can accept it's the new normal is because we have the methods, we have the principles, and enough examples that it works to ease all of those anxieties that we had at the beginning and that we may have now in relation to AI. In many of those cases, those collaborations also change the world. I am picking an example that you may remember, one of the early collaboration examples, when Ukrainian journalists joined forces with volunteers to literally fish documents out of a pond that former President Viktor Yanukovych and his inner circle had disposed of on their way as they were fleeing out of the country for Russia. Yanukovych leaks. Going forward, to understand AI, to investigate AI, and to co-opt AI, that's our mission, co-opt it for good. We're going to need some of the same ingenuity, the same radical sharing kind of mentality, and thinking outside of the box approach that we use, that fueled all of us when we went from lone wolves to collaborators. So how do we build the same confidence that we have now in collaboration for the AI field in journalism? How do we turn it into the new normal? How do we spread the news that just as journalists can no longer ignore the climate story because it is in all of their beats, nobody can ignore the AI story because it has already transformed your beat. For investigative journalists, the challenge is twofold. Is to hold AI accountable and to co-opt it for good, to co-opt it for our work. And to me, those are two sides of the same coin and cannot be understood separate from each other. So we see a little bit today in this presentation, both sides of that coin. So a quick example, how did I come into AI? I am not a coder, I am not a data journalist, so that's good news. Maybe most of you are not coders and data journalists. I am an editor and I am a manager. And my first encounter with AI came about 7 years ago when we were doing, at ICIJ, we were wrestling to the ground millions of documents that later became known as the Paradise Papers. And at the time, we had a problem of volume and we had a problem of consistency. Why was that? Because we had understood, because of, volume and consistency. We had identified a particular kind of document that was incredibly valuable to us. And those documents were called loan agreements. And those loan agreements were valuable because they were proxies often for very dubious payments and money flows. But those loan agreements were floating amid millions of records that were of different kind of value, including some that were of no value, that were literally trash, that had nothing to do with our investigation and were just getting in the way. So we needed to separate the good from the bad, the loan agreements from everything else That was we needed to follow that kind of money. But those documents, there was a problem. They all looked a little bit different from one another. So it's not that we could just go ahead and search for them in our search engine. So what we did is we turned to our fantastic data team, and I am kind of having an emotional moment because the data editor is here, Emilia, who is now the incoming director of GIJN. Also, my data editor for my new job is here, Kang, and they're sitting together, and I don't know if they know each other, but but I am just loving this moment. And here I am talking about things that they know a lot more than I do. So the problem with these loan agreements. So what we did is our data team, led by Emilia, what they did is they used a subset of AI called machine learning to teach the computer what the range of possibilities with these elusive documents were. So what were the common key terms? What were the common formatting features of those documents? And they developed an algorithm called a classification algorithm, and they set that algorithm free to go and find all the documents that looked like that. A classification algorithm in its most basic definition works like this. Is this a bagel or is this a donut? Is this a loan agreement or is this something else? So it seems so routine and so boring, and sorry if you were expecting more fireworks, but it was so useful. It was incredibly revelatory because it allowed us to get to a lot of story leads in just a fraction of the time that we would have spent if we had done this work manually. And that is the beauty of this technology, that it takes you from the chaos to the pattern to the story lead, from the chaos to the pattern to the story lead. And in this case, there were many story leads. One of them had to do with one of the world's biggest companies, Glencore, and how it had used some of these loan agreements to pay dubious partners in the DRC that were helping the company obtain access to vast amounts of mines in that country. So the exercise allowed us to just simplify that impossible task into something that was very actionable. I will come back to co-opting AI for good with more recent examples. But before that, I want to go back to holding AI accountable, so we don't forget about that. Probing AI is every investigative reporter's unavoidable responsibility at this time. And why is that? So I have a few reasons why is that. First of all, because AI is everywhere, and that means that it has become infrastructure, just like the internet. And when something becomes infrastructure, then that means that it becomes invisible and is so much more difficult to tackle. It's a game-changing technology. I don't need to explain that. It is often designed without the most vulnerable people in mind, and that is a huge problem. It is largely unregulated. Governments are literally scrambling as we speak to come up with a set of rules in countries around the world and in the European Union, and mostly talking to industry types about what they should do. There's a huge imbalance in knowledge, I should say a huge concentration of knowledge that is incredibly worrisome, and is very proprietary and secretive type of technology. This is just last week. I don't know if you read. Some of the biggest makers of AI technology met with US senators and to give them advice. And this was a closed meeting in the US Senate, and no press was allowed in the room. So what can go wrong? What can go wrong? This is why we need to hold AI accountable. So what do we do? So in practical terms, how do we do this? So I'm going to talk about 3 things. There are more things, and the next speaker is going to give you an even better rundown of what to do. First thing, shake off the fear, right? We're all kind of a little bit of paralyzed. Is it my job? Is it somebody else's job? Is it the tech desk job? And my message here is I'm sorry. This is much more an accountability story, and it's much more of a political story than it is a business story and it is or a tech story. And I'm not the only one saying that. I'm actually quoting a pioneer in AI reporting called Karen Howe. If you haven't read her work and you are starting to delve into the world of AI reporting, you have a first name that you should write down and start following her on X, I guess it's called, and other platforms. So check out the fears, and let's get out of the way the myth that you need to have a technical background in order to investigate AI. What you need to know and do is you need to know the basic terms and the basic ways in which this technology works. So what can and cannot do, what AI is and what is not. And then, after we go over this hurdle, which is not that bad, we just go and document the harms, which is what you do with every other investigative story. That's what we do, day in and day out. So here are a few helpful questions for reporters investigating algorithms in their communities. What system has been automated? What does that mean? Who is being harmed? Who is paying? Who is benefiting? I like this one. What data is the algorithm learning from? That's usually a big part of the problem. Is it all data, all biased data? Who collected it? What are the problems with that data? Another important story, what do makers of AI say that the technology can do versus what the technology actually does? And what are some unintended uses of the technology? And when we say unintended uses of the technology, just a quick example, in the US, a fellow we were supporting at the Pulitzer Center, he started looking at a technology as a social media sort of app fueled by AI that was supposed to help colleges identify cases where students were in mental health distress and possibly could commit suicide. The colleges adopted this technology for that good purpose, and instead, what happened next is that they used the technology to monitor students' protests. Instead of monitoring how the students were suffering, they monitored how the students were organizing themselves to protest at the college campuses. So those are the kind of unintended uses. These were also the questions that a wonderful reporter who might be in this room or not, I haven't seen him, Gabriel Geiger, who works for Lighthouse Reports. He and his team asked these questions for 2 years as they investigated an algorithm that had been deployed by the government of the Netherlands with the purpose of rooting out people who supposedly were defrauding the welfare system. So long story short, they did an incredible work through public records requests, incredible persistence and patience, and they were able to obtain the full algorithm from the government. So another technique, FOIA, or whatever it's called here, public records requests. They were able to obtain the data that the algorithm was trained on, the model file, and the code. That, in their words, is what is called the Holy Trinity in AI reporting, and it's very rare. So also don't go out here expecting that you will obtain that. It's a very rare case, and it's fantastic that they were able to obtain it. Because what they were able to do was to kind of reverse engineer the algorithm and try to understand how it was being applied on the population that, on the welfare population in the Netherlands. And what is it that they found? They found that the algorithm was discriminating based on ethnicity, age, gender, and parenthood status. What does that mean? That means that if you were a young single mom who didn't speak Dutch perfectly, as far as the algorithm was concerned, you were definitely a fraudster and you were flagged for an investigation, and your services or your welfare benefits were possibly cut. Gabriel will be speaking at the conference on Thursday at 10:45. I hope that you all go and listen to the methodology and also the incredible impact that his work had. So what these investigations show us is, next point in how do we go about holding AI accountable, these are incredibly, profoundly human stories. It's all about real individuals in real communities experiencing some very specific harms. So how different that is from this, like, the world will disappear in 200 years or in 100 years. That, we can't do anything about that. This, we can do a lot about that. So instead of solely writing about the technology and about the business and about the money, let's center the people who are experiencing the impact of AI firsthand. And this can be challenging, this can be tricky, because often the people that are being discriminated by these algorithms are the last ones to find out that they are being discriminated by an algorithm. Because nobody goes and tells them, hey, we're cutting, you're maybe a fraudster, we're cutting your benefits because the algorithm told us so. So it's tricky, but there are many ways in which resourceful investigative journalists working with privacy groups and NGOs and looking through court records can really find out and pursue the stories of these victims. This is what Barsha Bansal, an Indian reporter, did beautifully last year when she was investigating an Uber algorithm. And this Uber algorithm in India, what it was doing is it was a facial recognition algorithm that was essential for all the Uber drivers. They could not get in the app without having their faces recognized by the algorithm, except the algorithm was flawed. And so it failed to recognize all the time certain features of the Indian drivers. And what happened, and you are like, okay, big deal. Well, big deal was that they were shut down from the app, and then they couldn't work, and they couldn't earn a living for days and sometimes weeks until they were finally allowed back again. So Barsha didn't have access to the algorithm. She, Uber was not going to tell her much. So what she did is she went to the airport and she hung out with the drivers. And she sat with them and she looked at their phones and she saw it like live, how the system was working. And then to give more systematicity to her research, she created a survey. And that survey, through the trust that she had earned from the drivers, became pretty viral and gave a really solid data backbone to her story. So centering AI, centering people, not only centering the technology. And then finally, get out of our bubbles, right? This is, as we said at the beginning, this is a complex story, this is a global story, and this is a cross-discipline story. So an algorithm that is made, let's say, here in Sweden, maybe has the data tested and labeled in places like Venezuela or the Philippines. It can then have prototypes tested in South Africa, and then the algorithm is sold to governments around the world. So this is not a story that you can just look at one place and find all the elements. So open a little bit that perspective. Follow the money, the supply chains, find partners in different disciplines, like in a science park like this one. They have to be your best friends, those technicians, those coders, those scientists that, they have all the technical knowledge that maybe you don't, but they don't have the real world problems sometimes. And that's what the journalist brings. The real world problem meets the technical knowledge and beautiful things happen. And this is what we're going to see in my last example before I finish. But before we go to the example, I want to say, be rigorous, because this is a litigious bunch. There are already libel lawsuits in the US against reporters in the mainstream media that ask questions to these AI makers and wrote stories. And it's not that common to find libel cases in the US environment, as you know, because we have a pretty strong law and protections of journalists. So if that is happening in the US, imagine what can happen in other countries with fewer protections. So be rigorous. And that's another incentive for working with people that really, really understand the technology and can help you answer any questions you may have. And finally, it's not all harm. There are many, even though I'm giving you a pretty gloom picture, there are many positive stories and positive uses and examples of communities that are having a lot of agency in the way that they are using the technology. And one, again, Karen Howe, she did this story in New Zealand, where she found an indigenous community that was using machine learning, this subset of AI, to preserve their rapidly disappearing Maori language. And that was fantastic. That is ongoing. And just like the indigenous community in this case, they found this use of AI to help solve a need. Investigative journalists can use AI to enhance the work that we do. And now I do go to my final example. Let me say, so these impossible stories, why do we need this technology? Because as we said before, the data is too big, it's too messy, it's inconsistent, and with human means, it will take us forever. What are, yes, again, chaos, pattern, story lead, remembering a little bit. So examples of journalists that have used machine learning in different years, what they have used it for. They have used it to follow the money. Many of you here probably use the Aleph from OCCRP. That platform is powered by AI, and in the background, AI is helping make those amazing connections between people, places, and companies that then lead you to patterns and to story leads. Journalists have used it to reveal underreporting of serious crimes by police. They have used it to analyze millions of contracts and spot the patterns of corruption, and that was actually done in Peru through an algorithm called Funes that you can search. They have used it to predict trends, for example, the kinds of people that were going to go bankruptcy during the pandemic. And they have used it, very interesting uses, to investigate environmental crime, combining machine learning with satellite imagery. And so let me now introduce you, Joseph Polisuk from Armando Info, which is a Venezuelan outlet working on investigative reporting and a partner of many of you, I'm sure. So Joseph, let me go back to what happened with Joseph. So he and I had worked on Panama Papers together. And then one day during the pandemic, he called me and he said, "Hey, Marina, I want to investigate the criminal infrastructure of the Venezuelan Amazon." And I was like, what's that? "I want to investigate gold smuggling, but I don't want to investigate it one mine at the time," which is some of like the work that he had done until that point. One mine at the time. "I want to look at the full picture in a systemic way. And the only way that I can do that is with artificial intelligence." And then he hung up. So I was like, okay. Is he a data journalist? Is he? No. Is he a computer wizard? He's not. Does he have extensive experience with AI? He doesn't. He's a plain and regular and traditional investigative reporter who is very resourceful and who knew enough, not a ton, enough about how AI works to understand that it was going to help him solve his problem. And his problem was that he needed to investigate what was the setting. The setting was the jungle, impenetrable, a place that very few people have the knowledge and the skills to be able to go to. And we have one person in this room that actually does have those skills. Second, there was a pandemic raging, so even if somebody wanted to go, probably couldn't. And third, there's a growing presence of paramilitary groups in that part of southern Venezuela, where the Amazon rainforest is. So Joseph eventually joined the Pulitzer Center Rainforest Investigations Network, a network that we host to do stories like this. And together, we reach out to an NGO that is a name that you should also write down, especially if you are doing environmental investigations. It's called Earthrise Media. Earthrise Media. And Earthrise Media, their mission is to help journalists use advanced technology to tell climate stories. So Joseph brought all the shoe leather reporting, all the experience on the ground, and Earthrise put that tech capacity. Traditional should-letter reporting meets mission-driven computer scientists. So what did they do? How did this work? In the simplest terms, and I'm sure I am oversimplifying, the first thing they did is to create a database with what the reporters already knew. So the whole process starts with what the journalist has done, has seen, and understands about the real world. By creating that database, they were able to go to satellites, and it's not as expensive or difficult these days to access that information, and there's someone in my team who can help you if you have questions specific about that. So they went and they looked at the satellite images to teach the computer what these gold mining sites, like this one, and the clandestine runways that led to those gold mining sites looked like. I forgot to say that before. There were two markers of this criminal infrastructure: the gold mining sites themselves, open pit gold mines, and the runways, the illicit runways that are ubiquitous in the Amazon, because that is the infrastructure that the criminals need to bring the machinery to take out the gold, the drugs, or whatever they are taking out of the country on a daily basis. So then the computer scientists deployed an algorithm program to recognize and associate similar images to these aerial shots of the open pit mines and the clandestine airstrips in order to identify the patterns in the jungle. So remember, from chaos to pattern to story lead. They identified more than 3,000 gold mining sites. 3,000. Maybe when they, Maria de Los Angeles, she's one of the people in the investigation. How many sites do you think the reporters knew before the algorithm? 30. So they started with 30 or 40 mines that they knew existed. And by the time the algorithm was done with the work, they had more than 3,000 gold mining sites mapped in the Amazon, as well in the Venezuelan Amazon, as well as 42 of these illicit runways that the criminal networks build to bring things and take out things. So that was amazing. 3,000 mines is the equivalent to 40,000 soccer fields, by the way. Then they cross-referenced that data, the 3,000 mines, with another database the journalists had created over time, over many years, which is a database of criminal groups and criminal acts in that, and networks in that part of the Amazon. So now they are like cross-referencing the new findings with all knowledge of criminality. And finally, once they had done that, they used the leads provided by the algorithm to guide the reporter's reporter's work in the field. No longer an impossible story or a blind adventure, but a very precise and targeted field investigation. And the person who did that field work is Maria de Los Angeles Ramirez, who is here. Can you say hello? Maria de Los Angeles lives in southern Venezuela. She's a local journalist with local expertise who connects with national and global networks of reporters and does a fantastic job. And as you see, and by the way, this is the database of the criminal cases. That can be she. And as you see, I love this, that the algorithm part of work is safeguarded by traditional reporting at the beginning and traditional reporting at the end. The AI model, the AI work is never in isolation. It's never here, it's never alone. It's always safeguarded by the knowledge and the skills of the human beings that are called journalists. And what a beautiful thing it would be if all algorithms were deployed like this, with humans dutifully watching to catch the inevitable mistakes. And I'm finishing The stories were publishing in Armando Info and as well as in El País. They also inspired other journalists in the New York Times. I love when the Venezuelan journalist inspires the New York Times and The Intercept to expand the investigation to the Brazilian Amazon. And then Earthrise Media and the Pulitzer Center joined forces, and we created a platform where we publish all the data, all the information, all the code, so other journalists and other investigators looking into the Amazon criminality can now use this information for their own stories. We want these methodologies and these technologies, these models, to be as replicable as possible, to serve more than one story and to serve more than one purpose. It's incredible to think that all of these innovations and learnings are happening at a time of so much upheaval in the media, in our industry, in the world. We all have gone through a lot in recent years, and yet there is great momentum and there's synergy of people, of ideas, and methods. What is going on in our profession reminds me of those scientists coordinating their telescopes from different corners of the Earth to see what, until that moment, was unseeable. Remember, the more telescopes involved, the sharper the image of the black hole, as long as there was discipline, coordination, trust, and a little bit of luck. I am counting on all of you, muckrakers, on this community's ingenuity and courage to give us three things: a sharper image of the journalistic values and principles that endure beyond technological revolutions, a deeper conversation about the role that these technologies can play in strengthening or dismantling our democratic fabric, and three, bolder ideas on how we might create a more equitable and inclusive AI field in journalism. So here's to hoping that we continue to reach for the impossible and the unseeable with new tools, deeper determination, and more collaboration. Thank you so much.